Yesterday we learned that there are two opinions about the testimony for the new moon. According to Rabbi Shimon, you can have two relatives testify that they've seen the new moon in order to establish Rosh Chodesh. And according to the sages, and that's who we follow practically, halachically, you may not. It's no different to any other testimony where the witnesses may not be related to each other. Now, we said that there's two possible ways in which testimony works. Either testimony is intended to clarify something, so we don't know what happened, and we need people to come tell us what happened. Or testimony, as the Torah says it, yakum davar, actually makes something into a reality. So if you go with a view, like Rabbi Shimon does, that we're going to look at all the astronomical charts, and we're going to know when Rosh Chodesh is anyway, in that case, the witnesses are there just to clarify something we actually already know from our science. We're just getting corroboration from witnesses who saw it happen. In that case, they're not really witnesses in the classical sense, so we can have two relatives testify together. But according to the sages, which is where we left off last time, according to the sages, this is identical to any other kind of testimony, which means that the entire reality, what's going to constitute Rosh Chodesh, is going to be their words. It's only if they're not around, then we'll make the next day Rosh Chodesh, if there's no witnesses. But there's no way in the biblical, or even not even biblical, in the ancient system, there's no way to establish today as Rosh Chodesh without witnesses. Therefore, those witnesses establish the reality. Therefore, they have the same rules as any other witnesses. They may not be related to each other. And that left us with a question, which is, well, that doesn't seem to make sense. Because if you're giving so much weight to the testimony of the witnesses, why are you still second-guessing them and making them check out against the astronomy? Make up your mind. Either the goal is to have witnesses that establish the reality, and we should trust them implicitly, or there's a scientific method, in which case we don't need the witnesses at all. Something doesn't add up over here. So the answer to unpacking this story is, like is very often the case in Judaism, if you want to understand the answer to a particular question, what you've really got to do is dig down into the subject matter and identify what the subject matter is all about. Because unfortunately, what happens very often is somebody asks a question and they expect an answer, and people feel very pressured to give an answer, so they respond. And when you respond without context, just because you want to answer the question, the person leaves there with an answer to their question and a fundamental lack of knowledge about the subject. And that's exactly what's happening over here. This is not just a question about whether or not we accept the witnesses at their word. This is a question about what is Rosh Chodesh all about. And as we explore that, we'll discover that there's something in the Rosh Chodesh process that is better off if it's worked out rationally using the scientific method. And there's something about Rosh Chodesh that is better off if it is worked out based on the testimony of witnesses, which is basically saying, I'm going to follow Hashem's system, even if it doesn't always make logical sense. So before we can get there, let's understand why it is that this mitzvah, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, this mitzvah that we have to identify the new moon and then establish the calendar based on the new moon, why is that the first mitzvah that the Jewish people are given? In fact, it's such a big question that it's asked in various contexts as, for example, the Torah should have started with this mitzvah. Because ultimately the Torah is a book of instructions, it's not a book of history. So how come the Torah starts with the story of creation? Should have got straight to the point and started with this mitzvah because this is the first mitzvah. But then that in turn raises a question, why is this the first mitzvah? So think of it. They're still in Egypt. They're not technically slaves because once the plagues began, the slavery effectively ended because the Egyptians were preoccupied with trying to protect themselves against the onslaught of plagues. But the Jews were still in Egypt and they didn't yet have their freedom. What we were talking about last night, right? So they may have been exempt from the external pressures, but they weren't yet free. And Hashem decides that they have to be told this mitzvah at that point when they're still in Egypt. The question is why? And why is this the first mitzvah? Surely the first mitzvah should be the first of the 10 commandments. I am Hashem, your God. Doesn't that make more sense? I mean, think about it just logically. The basis of doing mitzvahs must be faith in Hashem. Why else would a person commit themselves to do mitzvahs? So surely, the first thing that we should be learning is, I am Hashem your God. And that you accept Hashem's authority. And then once you accept Hashem's authority, here are the details of what you're supposed to do. In fact, in the Shema is designed exactly that way. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The first thing we say in the Shema is, we accept Hashem's authority. Then we say, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha. You should love Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul. You should study the Torah, put on tefillin, mezuzahs. And the Gemara tells us that the structure of the Shema is to tell us that the first thing you're supposed to do is accept Oil Malchus Shemayim, the authority that Hashem has over us, and then you can accept all mitzvahs, the responsibility to actually fulfill the mitzvahs. That's logical. So surely the very first thing, if you had to ask any person who's not familiar with the parasha of the week, ask any person what is the first mitzvah the Jewish nation was given, they will most likely say, I am Hashem your God. Because they know that that's the first of the Ten Commandments, and in everybody's mind, that's when we were given mitzvahs. It was the Ten Commandments. On further exploration, it turns out that that's not the case. That before they left Egypt and before they got to Mount Sinai, they were already given a mitzvah. Why this mitzvah? That this month will be for you the first of all months. Why is this the mitzvah?
So are you saying that this is the first mitzvah only given when they were in exile in Egypt?
So it's the first mitzvah given to the Jewish people.
From that.
Right. Because let's say the mitzvah of having a bris was given to Avraham and his family. It's not given to the Jewish people. And that's why it has to be reiterated again in the Torah, because we don't actually have a bris because Avraham did it. We have a bris because Hashem said so. But this is the first mitzvah that's being presented to the people as a people. And I could think of a whole lot of other mitzvahs. For example, and it's going to follow just a few lines later, there's the mitzvah of the Pesach sacrifice, which they were going to have to do on the night before they left Egypt. Maybe start with that, because it's practical. And I know you're going to say that the moon is also practical, because when this mitzvah is given is before the Rosh Chodesh of that month of Nisan. But why is that so integral to Judaism? Why is that? I mean, when you present something as the first instruction, you kind of expect it to be the basis on which the whole thing is built. That's kind of what you expect, right? That's what you expect. Now, let me ask you a different question. Would you not say that I am Hashem your God is the basis, the foundation everything's built on? Would you not say that? So how is Achodesh Hazeh Lochem now the basis, the first mitzvah that's ever given? What about it is so unique? So I think everybody will agree, because it makes a lot of sense, that to say I am Hashem your God is the basis and foundation of Judaism, because if you don't believe in Hashem, everything else is moot. You're not going to do anything. Think about it. You're not going to do any of these things if you don't believe in Hashem. Maybe you'll observe certain things that are considered like humanitarian or basic ethical principles. But like, for example, nobody is going to say you can't flip a light switch on Shabbos unless you believe in Hashem. Why else would you do that? Nobody else is going to say that you can't have kosher meat with kosher cheese unless you believe in Hashem. There's no fundamental ethical, moral basis to those things. So the foundation of all Torah mitzvahs has to be belief in Hashem. And at the same time, one of the most important things we have to know about anything that we do in our lives is, if you want to get the maximum value out of something that you're doing, and not only maximum value, if you want to ensure that what you're doing is right, you always have to understand where you're supposed to be going with what you're trying to do. If you don't understand the destination, you don't understand the purpose, then it's very difficult to imagine you're actually going to achieve it. So there are two things that are required in order to get the Jewish people to become the Jewish people, to start this mission that Hashem has for us in the world. The one thing that's required is we have to believe in Hashem. And we already know that when Moshe came to tell them that they were going to leave Egypt, the Torah tells us, Vaya Amen Ha'am, the people believed what Moshe was telling them. So there is already a kernel of belief in Hashem that exists. It's going to be spelled out further at the Ten Commandments. But this is the launch of the Jewish people. When they leave Egypt, that, as the prophet Yechezkel tells us, is the birth of the Jewish nation. This is when we're going to become Jewish. This is the correct time to give a sense of direction. What is Judaism about? What's the goal of Judaism? The goal of Judaism is encapsulated in HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodashim, that this month will be the first of all the months for you. Encoded in that is the secret of what Judaism is all about. So you have to have faith in Hashem in order to do it, and you have to have the goal and direction so you know what you're doing. This is the goal and direction. Okay, so let's understand what in the story tells us the goal and direction of Judaism. So, by way of introduction, the Gemara tells a story about a great sage called Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. I don't know if you've heard of him. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, eventually the Gemara will tell us that when he passed away was the end of Anshe Maaseh, which means that he was the last of the sages who was able to do very wild, supernatural things. For example, and this is relevant to our story, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was an incredibly impoverished person, and his daughter once came crying on Friday afternoon to say that they had no oil in the house to be able to light Shabbos candles. So he said to her, well, what do we have in the house? She said, we have vinegar. So Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa said, the same God who decided that oil should be flammable can decide that vinegar will be flammable. And they used the vinegar that Shabbos to light the Shabbos candles. It was that kind of a person. It was constantly engaged. The Gemara tells very wild stories about the things that he did that were totally supernatural. But they were completely poverty-stricken. I think the expression is that they were as poor as a shul mouse. So one day it got too much for his wife, and she said, you have to daven that Hashem should help us. We just can't go on like this. And he said, okay. So he davens, and he asks Hashem to resolve their financial crisis. The following day, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa is walking home, or walking to the shul, wherever he was going, and literally on the side of the road, he sees a cylinder made out of gold. Literally, lying on the side of the road. And there's nothing about it that you could identify, because, halachically, if somebody can identify something as theirs, you have to find the owner. This is very generic, you could tell. There's no way that anybody could claim it as theirs. So he's overjoyed, he comes back home, shows his wife, my prayers were answered, here, we're good. This is our retirement package, we're good for the rest of our lives. That night, the wife has a dream. And in her dream, she's wandering through the halls of what's called the Yeshiva Shel Maila, the heavenly yeshiva. And all these great souls of all the generations are engaged in the most beautiful experience of Torah study at a level that, the human can't experience. And she sees that all of the great sages are sitting, each one at a gold table. And it's a gold table with 4 legs. And then she finds herself in a place that's allocated for Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. And there's a gold table with 3 legs. She wakes up in a panic. And she realizes something's not right over here. So she tells her husband the next morning, she had this dream. Daven that they take away this golden cylinder. Because obviously it's coming at a cost, right? Daven that they take it away. Fine. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa goes and he davens. And the next thing, literally in front of their eyes, this gold cylinder dissolves, disappears. So the Gemara comments, this is the reason I'm telling you the story. The Gemara comments on this and says that the miracle of the disappearance of that golden leg is greater than the miracle of its appearance. Again, the miracle of the disappearance of the golden leg is greater than the miracle of its appearance. Why? So the Gemara says, because min shamaya, from heaven, mi have Yahave, it is normal to give, mishkala shakli, it's not normal to take away. It's a very profound message. You could spend a lot of time actually on this message. Like, what does it mean they never take away? Leave that. But the principle is that the way the protocol works in heaven is that we share and we don't take away what we've shared. So therefore the fact that Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was able to reverse the process, that is a greater achievement than the fact that he was able to get the bracha in the first place. It's almost like saying, Hashem's given you something and now you're overriding what Hashem wants. In a similar vein, we have another statement from our sages, which is, Gedolim ma'asei tzadikim the actions of tzaddikim are greater mimaisa shamayim va'aretz than the story of creation. That's quite a surprising statement. What could a tzaddik do already that's greater than the creation of heaven and earth? Let's remind ourselves, how does creation happen? What's the expression that we use to describe creation? Okay, so that's the word in the Torah, right? But what's the expression that describes the dynamic of creation? The Ramban gives us this description right at the beginning of the Torah. It becomes a very commonly used description in Hasidus and Kabbalah. Is we say, Yesh me'ayin. Something from nothing. That's how creation happens. Yesh me'ayin. Now, ayin doesn't just mean there was no world and now there is a world. You know the story where this group of atheist scientists had spent their whole careers trying to debunk the fact that there's a God. And eventually they make a big announcement and they say that everybody speaks about God and they give so much credibility to the Bible because of the amazing thing that he did, that he created a man out of earth. And we've now done all of this research and we've experimented and we now know how to make a man out of earth. We're going to present it at a very public forum. All the religious leaders are welcome to come and to try and prove that there's still a God, despite what we're going to do. So they all assemble, and they're about to start, and they bring out this whole container of earth, and a rabbi shouts out, he says, hey, make your own earth. Yesh me'ayin doesn't just mean that there wasn't something and now there is. Like there wasn't ever such a thing as a cell phone and now there's a cell phone. There wasn't such a thing as a car, now there's a car. That's not yesh me'ayin. That's yesh me'yesh. That's taking existing materials and finding out how to use the existing materials to create things that we never had before. Yesh me'ayin means it didn't exist before. That means that prior to the creation of the world, there was not, as the scientists claim, some kind of a big subatomic soup that everything was exploded out of. Ayin means there was no subatomic particles. Ayin means not only that the physical did not exist, ayin means that even the idea didn't exist. Until Hashem introduces the concept of a universe, of creation, even the idea of creation doesn't exist. So now you're telling me that our actions, or the actions of tzaddikim, are greater than the actions of Hashem creating yesh me'ayin, creating existence out of absolutely nothing? How could you have the chutzpah to say such a thing? And the answer lies in this story of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. Because once Hashem creates a system, as great as that system is, and as impossible as it is for us to replicate that system, because we cannot create yesh me'ayin, now what remains, the greatest thing that you could possibly do, is reverse the system. If you could do something which goes against the grain of what Hashem has built into creation, that's a big deal. If you could make them take back the golden leg, that's a big deal. So in the words of the Alter Rebbe, Hashem makes gashmias, he makes physicality out of ruchnias, out of spirituality. And our job is to make ruchnias, spirituality, out of gashmias, out of physicality, which is exactly what we do all day, every day as Jewish people. Our entire focus is to take the physical world and engage it in the spiritual activities. And more importantly, holy activities, because not everything spiritual is necessarily holy. That's what we do. That's why our Judaism is so finicky about materialistic details. Time, size, when, where, who. If you light the candles at the wrong time, you've transgressed Shabbos. If you don't have enough of this bread, you can't say that bracha. Like everything is so finite. Why? Because our job is to reverse the process, to take our very limited, finite reality and flip and convert it to become something which is infinite and holy. Take something which is completely mundane and turn it into divine. That's our job. In other words, the job of the Jewish people is to do the unexpected, or if you really want to be dramatic, you could say to do the impossible. Because it doesn't sound possible. If Hashem has locked this into a mundane, finite reality, it doesn't sound possible that we should be able to reverse it. That's our job. Our job is to innovate a reality about this world that is so unique and so revolutionary that it's even not how Hashem designed the world. Imagine such a thing. What's the word that we use in Hebrew to represent something which is innovative, surprising, revolutionary, unexpected? It's a very common word, although the direct translation is none of those words that I've used. That's a little bit misleading. Bara is to create, right? So creation, that's the Ramban's whole point. Creation is yesh me'ayin. That's to create something out of nothing. That is absolutely new, innovative, revolutionary, but that's in Hashem's domain. In our domain, in ordinary language, what word would you use to say that, wow, I did not expect that in Hebrew? You would say, this is a chidush. A chidush means an innovation that I didn't anticipate. So, for example, when people are studying, they'll often say, what's the chidush of the Gemara? What's the chidush of the Rambam? In other words, what perspective is the Gemara or the Rambam or whoever I'm studying giving me that I didn't anticipate? That's what the word chidush means. It's directly related to the word chadash, which means new. And if something is truly new, that means it was never here before. It never happened before. That is the first mitzvah in the Torah. Ha-chodesh hazeh lachem. You want to know what it is to be Jewish? This is what it is to be Jewish. To take chodesh, to take a month, not a year. A year is shana. A year is a cycle that repeats itself consistently again and again and again. The sun looks the same every single day. It repeats at exactly the same time frame. The moon, chadash, every month. It's a new moon. So there are two mechanisms of how the world works. There is the secular solar system, which the rest of the world follows. That's a predictable system where nothing ever breaks the mold. Ha-chodesh hazeh lachem. You want to know what it is to be Jewish? To be Jewish is to be like the moon. To be something which is constantly new. Something which is constantly bucking the trend. Something which is going against the grain, creating chidush in the world. Lachem, that's for you. That's what it means to be Jewish. Now that we know that information about this mitzvah and about what Rosh Chodesh represents, with that we can go back to understanding why out of all of the mitzvahs, specifically Rosh Chodesh is the one that requires both witnesses, which is saying it's because Hashem said this is the reality, and Seichel, which means I understand that this is the reality, because both of those are going to be necessary in order to make this Chidush, this revolutionary innovation in the world, but that will continue next time.